to the ADNA Presents Know Your Narrator. Today, we're very happy to have Tanja Milojevik. She is joining us as a voice talent, sharing her expertise. Thanks for joining us, Tanja.
Thank you for having me, Roy. I'm really excited to be here.
I can hear it in your voice. I am too.
It's great.
What do you love about audio description?
As a consumer, I love when audio description is part of the story and you can sort of feel the art coming through. Not only is it coming through with the film that you're watching, the actors bringing it to life, but the narrator is as much of a part of the story as anyone else is. And also, when the writing becomes part of it, I know that some of the standards say that you shouldn't surmise what folks are feeling or maybe some of the looks they're giving if you don't know for a fact, and it's best to be objective. But my personal thought process as a consumer is that I really enjoy that. In The Crown, for example, they'll say what sort of a look or so and so is sitting stonily in the back seat, ignoring the crowds around them or pretending that they are not a part of it. Now, you could say that that's surmising things, that they're reading into it a little bit too much in the writing. But I say that it's more like an audiobook experience, kind of like Envision Canada does or did with some of their audio description. They make it almost an audiobook narrative to the rest of the movie. And it's beautiful. It's all collaborative art. It's like elevating, let's say elevating 2D to 4D. The audio description adds that immersive quality to it and makes it so that anyone listening can do other chores or maybe even work out or wash their dishes or something else while they're simply listening, and they'll get the whole experience and then some. Maybe things that they would have missed otherwise. It's just brilliant. I love it. I couldn't do without it, and I'm spoiled.
It's so great that you are spoiled. And as you said, when it comes to that surmising, that I love the comparison. Let's come back to that audiobook reference. But as you start off saying that you feel the art, that kind of feeling is, God, I love that word immersion. We use it all the time. It's like that immersion of bringing you into the story. Can you talk a little bit maybe about some differences between audiobooks and audio description?
Sure. I think the difference mainly with audiobooks is a lot of the time you get that internal monologue, what the character's thinking, what their motivations might be, and some of the background leading up to events that you're reading about. Maybe they give you newspaper articles, interludes. Stephen King is in mind here when I say that. But when you bring it back to audio description, a lot of the time, our aim is to be as objective as possible and simply describe where we have space, what's going on between the dialogue with costume changes, facial expressions, and or performance action sequences. But that immersion quality comes in where not only they tell you what the facial expression is, but the looks that are exchanged between characters. That's where you get a little bit of that blend where you do get a sense of the character's mindset and motivations that you might have missed otherwise. So I would say the audiobook goes even more into detail, but that's to be expected because no movie, even if it's adapted like Lord of the Rings, is able to capture all the details and exchanges that happen. Otherwise, the movie would be 10 hours long each, and we'd have a 30-hour narrative to watch. So it's almost a hybrid between an audiobook and simply a film that you're watching without any knowledge of what's going on with the visual aspect. And then let's bring it to live audio description, where when you're at a theater performance or, let's say you're at the Big Apple Circus and you're watching it with audio description, you have that additional pre-show, and then between acts, you have an additional pre-show description of costumes, setting, the set, what the set looks like itself, maybe even some of the moves. If it's more of a dance-based performance, they try to explain those. And that's where you get that additional audiobook piece where it's similar. It's almost like it's that interlude only put before the story. You get that first.
Oh, that's great. I love the interlude and the internal monologue differences. That really makes it clearer to understand the differences in experience. And as you had said earlier, when you were talking about how much you love audio description, very clearly started segueing into the advantages, the curb effect of audio description for sighted people and how they can also find the benefits. I know personally there's some shows where I have a really difficult time following the characters' names. That's just a
Oh,
struggle that I've
yes.
always had, right?
The Crown, right? So many
Oh my
characters.
goodness. Yes, yes. What a show. Yes. Well, what do you think about the other aspect of audio description from your other professional role when it comes to voicing audio description? How much of the experience is fed from your voiceover training and background? And how much is fed from your own experience as a consumer? Do they overlap? Are they separate? Can you share, maybe it's a overlap?
That's a really good question. I love it. A lot of the time, I would say that in anything that I do, whether it's voice acting for a character role or reading a short story, I always try to pay attention when I'm listening what I like about someone's performance and why it works. And then I have this exercise where I'll try to pick up on retakes just for the fun of it to see if I can pick up on it myself. Because if I can pick up on it, if I can personally get to the point where if I'm doing a pickup, no one notices it's a pickup, then I've done my job. But if people notice it's a pickup, then I have room for improvement of smoothing out that style and that consistency. And that training, obviously, it's not to say anything about any other performers, but it's just one of those things I personally have where I want to have consistency in tone, not only with the scene happening around it, but also with if I'm doing a pickup, I want to hear what I sounded like in that moment and match it as much as possible. So, to answer your question, that all comes back to part of it consistency and training, where when you learn about voiceover, the goal isn't in your voice and how your voice sounds. The goal is to convey the message of the story and have the audience lost where their brain is forming the pictures or forming the concepts that they're listening to. And they're fully seated in that world that they're experiencing in the movie or the show, and not to be listening to your voice. My goal is for them not to notice my voice at all if I can help it, just to sort of feel the effect of having the picture being painted in their mind fully. So to do that, partially I'm emulating what I'm hearing from other actors and other performances. Was their tone a little bit softer in a quieter moment of the story? Did they increase their pace in an action sequence? And how much acting are they doing in subtitles versus the almost more professional sounding, smoother narration of the actual audio description itself? So I really do try to keep all of those balancing points in mind and sound as natural as possible. And that's just a combination of training as well as really emulating what I enjoy about it as a consumer.
What a great answer. And we got to split off into some of those into a little more detail. Do you want to?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Because that thoughtfulness that you're giving to the audience, that message of the story, that they're immersed and lost in the story, let's use the word flow. I love how you said fully seated, and that it's that experience. And I think a lot of the misunderstanding about any kind of voiceover, whether it's audio description, narration, or otherwise, is that, oh, you've got such a great sounding voice that what you've shared in this is you've used the word training and you've used the word experience, that it's bringing something beyond just sounding good, that you bring a can I use the word intention? Is that a fair word?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Intention of balance.
And that balance too, right? Let's take it up a little notch because especially with audio description, there is this misconception of, well, you're doing less of a performance. And if I could speculate, and this is my opinion, I don't want to put it on you, Tanya, but I feel like with audio description, there is this high wire act where it's making sure that that balance is just seated in the right place where it's not too much and not too little. It's not less of a performance. It's actually a really curated performance in the sense that you're talking about to get that immersion experience. Can you maybe share an experience you've had outside of audio description in a voiceover class or an acting class where there were, take it as far back as you want, or maybe it was just a part of you always in performance where you found in that class that click, that aha moment where maybe an assumption you had about what voice acting is or acting is.
I don't know if I want to say that it necessarily happened in a class. I could certainly tie it to that partially, But really, when I discovered audio drama itself back in high school, because I didn't know what that was before, that was my first introduction to, wow, here's an acting medium that I could get into where I don't need to worry about a facial expression or, meeting the mark for the camera, etc. And the list goes on. So I started doing all kinds of research into it and then made my own podcast just for fun. But then eventually I got into college and I worked at the school radio station just working on promos, PSAs. We did a little bit of improv to try to get some crowd sounds for the background of some of these things. And that's when I realized I was having a lot of fun with it. And to sound natural is to be on candid camera. So you want to sound like yourself. That was the first moment I realized really what acting is bringing your own truth, and you have to bring sincerity to it. It has to come out of you somewhere. You've got to understand the motivation and relate to the situation or the character. This goes obviously for dubbing as well. Not only do you have to act, but you've got to emulate what the actor brought in the first place to their performance and make it believably sound the same, kind of like the series In the Dark. A lot of admiration for those folks that did the dubbing for it. So authentic. So I realized in that class in school, or rather in the college radio station, that acting really is nothing more than you being your authentic self while understanding the character and not letting too much of yourself in, but also respecting the voice of the story and the writer's intentions. And just again, it's that whole balance act. So that's where it started. And then I took an acting class in college later, and that solidified it even more. And networked through audio drama, and eventually started listening to audio description with subtitles, and it kind of became a snowball effect. But that was the aha moment, was really just realizing that if you enjoy it and if you're not afraid of the microphone, you just say, hey, I'm going to give it a shot and maybe I won't even send it in. You just have fun with it. That's really the key for me. That's what that was.
And also with all the experience and the training that you had, that seemed to feed the direction that those carefree moments where it's just like, let me try this out. Let's see if this works. That you had some skills or some craft that would be able to guide those decisions and that playfulness. I don't know. I don't want to be putting words in your mouth, but that's how it's coming across.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, compared to other voiceover talent that have gone through many, many classes formally, I can say I haven't gone through as many. I've done a couple. A lot of it really was observing others, learning from other experts, and emulating what I really, really admired and loved about it. And I think a lot of artists, because this is an art for all of us, learn how to improve their art by emulating what they love and then adding their own spin based on all of their influences and all of their role models that they've had through the years or through their experience. It just grows as you grow as a person. And as you move through life stages, your acting or your art changes naturally to mirror some of those other experiences that you've had. And then another sort of comfortable progression for me with acting was really when I was a teenager, my best friend and I used to sit on the phone like after 9 p.m. because all the minutes were free after that point. You didn't have to pay for minutes in the US. So you would just sit on the phone. You could sit there for hours until your parents caught you and told you to go to bed because it was a school night. And so we did improv. We created backstory for characters. We would take shows that both of us were into, take the premise of the show, like, for example, We're Alive, the audio drama, zombie apocalypse, survival situation, take the premise and run with it, create characters around that idea, and see how far we could keep the story going believably and do all the different voices. So that's kind of where I became comfortable with it. And then just recording myself with a microphone. I had a tape player as a kid and recorded myself all the time and my family. And I recorded almost audio pictures because I couldn't really see video or picture. I couldn't see what was going on. And for me, it was huge to have an audio memory of it later. The brain fades memory after a while, and there's nothing better than having it recorded. When you're older, you can listen to it, you can show it to your kids. It's very special.
Well, let's pivot to the next part of audio description as a voice talent that with all this experience and all this background and all the training and all those calls after 9 p.m. on weekdays, where did you find one of your maybe a specific challenge that you'd like to share with our audience that you're really proud of how you overcame it when it came to working in audio description as a narrator?
That's a really good question. One of the challenges was simply recording a script where I hadn't seen the rest of the script or heard the film or the show. International Digital Center has a really cool system where if you're a narrator working with them, they send you a script, but it's your lines alone. And you then sit down, you record your lines, and if they need pickups later, they'll let you know. They have more of an approach to narration where they prefer it to be objective and not super involved in the story, which works out really well for shows that they're describing as well as like documentaries and shows that don't need as much of that additional acting element. But that was a little bit of a challenge initially because I didn't know specifically how much time I had versus what sort of, I guess, slight emotion to give to the performance. So the way that I went by it was I spoke with the director, and he had mentioned that if the speed, if it says slower or normal speed versus faster, he kind of demonstrated the cadence differences to me. And it's conversational versus saying it a little bit faster so that it fits, without slurring your words. So going based on that direction, I gave it a shot and I had a lot of fun with it. Sometimes I provided two takes just in case, because I wasn't sure. Something sounded like it could be said a little bit more seriously versus maybe comedically. So in those cases, I'd give them two takes. And they said that was perfectly fine to do. It was up to kind of me to decide how to overcome that. So having that challenge, it made me feel very comfortable with that style of recording as well. And I can compare it to doing remote audio drama character work where I just have a script that maybe doesn't have direction at all of how that character should sound. And it's up to me to figure it out and bring the character to life. So I love that kind of a challenge and to find out later that it worked out well or it was what the writer intended. And then listening to it obviously in the mix where it fits. The nice puzzle pieces.
And it sounds like with each puzzle piece that you used your specific choices, maybe not necessarily having the context of what was happening, but you still thought, oh, this is something that could go this way or that. Let's try it this way and give them an alternative. That's the kind of care that you give to your clients to be able to, when it isn't clear, give them a few choices and go forward.
Yeah, and they were very gracious about it. They were willing to have that extra listening time, I guess I'll say, where they would have to spend more time listening to those takes to figure out what would work. But also another fun challenge that I really enjoyed was in your class actually. That was the first time that I was able to listen to a piece in real time while following with my script and audio describing. And it was nothing I had done before, but it was so much fun. And I was very excited that I made it through without like completely talking over the dialogue too much.
It's so neat to hear about everyone's different approach to how audio description is created. If you were to jump to, let's say, I'm going to make up 5 years from now, uh, and if you could have your dream world either as an audience of audio description or an audio description narrator, let's do part one and part two. What would be
Sure.
your dream scenario for each of those?
As an audience member, I would love if there was a possibility to audio describe VR games or VR simulations where you are immersed as the player or as the point of view character, I guess, whichever way you want to look at it. And everything is being audio described around you, whether that's a pre recorded track, depending on where your view is, where you turn your head and what you're interacting with specifically, or if it's someone in real time or maybe an AI describing it to you. Audio described experiences in the VR landscape, which is becoming more and more prevalent, is something out of science fiction. And I don't see why we couldn't make it happen because that I feel like that is the wave of the future. And also with self-driving technology being a thing, how much of that landscape will require audio description too. Imagine if you're driving, let's say you're in a self-driving car and you're going, and this isn't 5 years, I'm sure this is more like 10, 20 years down the road. But if you're driving along somewhere and there are sights to be seen, or you're traveling or something, that's an amazing area for audio description. There are so many different aspects to life where we miss out on it. And services like Ira now almost audio describe these things to us. Having it in your pocket and in the landscape of VR as a consumer would just be amazing. And then as a narrator, I guess I would say it would be a joy to continue to describe educational content, make more of it available, and even foreign films, just to expand what's available with audio description from other countries for audiences here in the US. And of course, dubbing and incorporating the beautiful work that places like AudioEyes do with their realistic subtitles, where folks are dubbing the voices and then you have another audio describer describing the action. And then the last thing I'll say as a narrator too is being involved in collaborating the writing process, maybe having more organizations naturally add audio description to their webinars or presentations where it's part of the game, kind of like captioning, would bring us more work as talent, but also create a level playing field in many more ways than maybe currently is available. The last thing I want to say as a consumer, just that I forgot to mention, was it would be wonderful if across all of these platforms, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, etc., you name it, that we had a copyright law or something like the Marrakesh Treaty, where audio description is shared across platforms universally, and we can all easily jump on any service that we have access to. And all of the beautiful work done by these artists, the writer, the narrator, etc., is available to everyone. Why do the work 5 times over if it's already done?
Wow, what great points. Each one of them. And most recently, it's like when watching Netflix here in the United States, they don't replace the on-camera actors or trade out the costumes. So it's I see the parody there, the parallel when it comes to audio description voice talents being consistent. It's a great point. Can we go back, please, to VR? And let me just geek out for
Sure.
a little bit. Escape rooms. Have you done any
I
escape rooms?
have.
Oh my gosh, tell me
Yes.
everything.
Yes, there is one. It was called Trapology Boston. I think they're still available. And they went out of their way to make it accessible. I contacted them ahead of time and mentioned that my boyfriend and I were both blind. We are going to attend, and we were interested in the one of their specific escape rooms where you had to like get out of this dungeon. You had an hour, of course, and they went out of their way to create like a podcast recording where normally you'd be reading something off of a tablet. They adapted that. They adapted different things that you would touch and made them light up as well as kind of buzz, and all kinds of different sensory things in the room itself. Like you would have to connect rope around these different pegs to create letters. So it was very, very creative. And then for some of very, very small portions of it that weren't easy to figure out non-visually, they had people in the room giving hints. So they went out of their way to do it. But if it was VR, something like that with our virtual world nowadays, you could do escape rooms with audio description easily, where you're maneuvering around the space and the narrator's explaining what's ahead of you, what's around you, and what you're interacting with, even.
One of the favorite parts about everything that you're talking about is that it looks like Ira has a whole new aspect, whether it's virtual reality or these virtual escape rooms that are happening. And gosh,
Oh,
we talked to Ira earlier about pitching them that it's like these escape rooms are now online and there's an interactive element. It's similar to a Zoom call with video as well as multiple participants that are kind of guiding the person through. It's a perfect segue for that kind of access. And how fun, since that dungeon that you escaped from already created it. It's like maybe that's the time for them to expand it worldwide and offer it to more people because it's already ready. It's like, here we go.
Oh, absolutely. I had started the dialogue with them, and then the pandemic happened.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah.
So I my goal is to check back in with them because they were interested in making things more and more accessible to everyone by including elements of podcast or recordings that you would execute and play to get more hints and things like that. I had had a couple of different ideas I gave them, so it was a lot of fun brainstorming. But it would be fun to create a group of people to bounce ideas off of and have a repository of here's how you can execute X, Y, and Z function in an escape room to make it more accessible. Even with escape rooms that are more, I guess, physical based, where you have to climb over things. I've heard of those. You could incorporate texture, or that would even be a great place for an audio describer to help you climb these things.
So it sounds like your role as audio description narrator is now expanding to escape room consultant. It sounds like a perfect fit. It's like we're set. Like we interviewed someone the other day and we made the leap from talking about mime and how it works for audio description narration. These are the kinds of things that I love about this podcast. Like who knows where we're going to end up. But one of the things that's impressing me the most here is that the way that technology is expanding the access, the connections that we as consumers can have, sighted or blind, that the connections are so important. And being able to know that whether it's self-driving cars or, as you had said, the educational content, that this kind of accessibility is happening. And even though it's not happening as fast as I would like, it's still happening in such great ways and so much more. I'm just glowing. I'm going to stop my sentence right there.
Oh, absolutely. I've even seen access improve in terms of Zoom calls where people voluntarily describe automatically what they look like or what their surroundings are. And I've seen like a show recently on, it was from the American Repertory Theater. It was a magic show and it was described by Corey Couture. She did an amazing job. But at that point, I picked up on it was an instance where the magicians were actually hearing her describe them and their actions in the breakout rooms that we were in,
Oh, wow.
because that was a unique situation where there were several different breakout rooms and the magicians were interacting with the audience. But she was there as well as a participant in the room, audio describing live what was going on. The other breakout rooms did not have audio description, so that folks who didn't need it could, or weren't curious about it, could go and access the show without that feature. So it was fascinating where the magicians were hearing the audio description and reacting to it and helping her out or going, "Oh, that's beautifully said. That's exactly what that's right. Yep. Okay." And then this, or they'll mention, "Oh, and there's this aspect that maybe you might want to mention too that's important, whatever." So they were collaborating with it with their own audio description for their own show. It was fascinating.
So cool. Oh, I love it,
Yeah.
Tanya. Thank you for joining us, Tanya. This is so, so exciting. I'm so honored that you made some time to share with our audience your experience as a voice talent and as a up and coming escape room enthusiast and and voice talent and consumer and all this other great stuff. So thank you very much. How can people reach you? Either maybe on social media, a website?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a truly an honor being here. I can't wait to see what's to come, and I'm excited to be part of the journey too. So my website is www.tanjamvoice.com. That's TANJAM voice.com. Otherwise, folks can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you just search my name, which is really hard to spell, or you can send me an email at Tanja, TANJA 631 at gmail.com, or through the contact form on my website too. I welcome questions or happy to give resources or anything really. Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Roy. It's been a pleasure.